right, let's talk more about the implementation of this travel ban now with CNN contributor Michael Weiss, CNN's political analyst Josh Rogin, CNN's military analyst Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona, and CNN legal analyst Pate. All right, I want to highlight now for you gentlemen, part of the executive order temporarily suspending the refugee program, saying this, quote, "It is the policy of the United States to protect its citizens from foreign nationals who intend to commit terrorist attacks in the United States and to prevent the admission of foreign nationals who intend to exploit United States immigration laws for malevolent purposes." So, Lieutenant Colonel, you first. How do you see the implementation of this executive order being complicated?
Yeah, well, when you cast a wide net, you pull up a lot of things you don't want. I think that's what we're seeing today with these two Iraqis at JFK. They've already been vetted. They've already gone through the process. There's no reason to keep these people out. I understand what Mr. Trump is trying to do, and he's trying to reset, how refugees are let into the country. That's fine. But let's reward those people that have actually served this country. And this is going to have a very chilling effect on recruitment of these people. These people perform a valuable service at great risk, and I don't know how we're going to recruit them if this is the way we treat them once they're allowed in.
So I wonder, Lieutenant, is it your feeling too that trying to interpret this executive order is going to take some time, and that perhaps the detainment of those two might it exemplify that the message is being misconstrued? Or is this supposed to be the application of this executive order, even if you have been rigorously vetted, just as these two, according to the attorney, have undergone?
Well, that's what we're going to find, and hopefully it resolves itself that way. This order, I don't think, was meant to apply to these two people, and so you have to have case-by-case exceptions, of course. But I think CBP may be overly zealous in interpreting this executive order. This will be sorted out, but this is the kind of thing that puts a human face on this, and I'm glad it's happening right away, so we can get this resolved instead of dragging this out.
And so, Michael, what are your concerns about potential repercussions as it pertains to how the reliance of good relationships between the U.S. and some of these Muslim nations that have been singled out?
Well, so you have 135 million people, most of them, all of them, perhaps Muslims, being told they can't come to the United States because they're guilty until proven innocent. This is to read from the hymn sheet of ISIS. I saw an article today that said ISIS has been surprisingly quiet about Donald Trump's moves in the last week. I think it goes back to the old saying, when your enemy is making a mistake, don't interrupt him. This is exactly what jihadists want the United States to do. They want us to build virtual and physical walls that say Muslims have no place here because we are inherently suspicious of them. They cannot integrate well into a democratic society. And, we're worried that ISIS is sending sleepers in these waves of refugees. The statistics also do not bear out Mr. Trump's policy. No Syrian refugee who has come over since the crisis began almost 6 years ago has been accused or found guilty of committing any kind of terrorist or jihadist attack. So I think this is, as Rick said, casting an overly wide net. And also, look, the requirements for gaining access to this country as a refugee are already pretty stringent. It takes about 2 years for a Syrian to be welcomed into the United States. They're in holding patterns in Europe and other Middle Eastern countries. So I'm frankly appalled. I think this is, even if you take it purely on a utilitarian level, which is to say you don't care about the Constitution or human rights, all your concern is national security, this is a defeating move.
So, Josh, there have been 14 executive orders thus far from the president in 7 days now. Is this the most consequential order that he has signed thus far?
Well, they're all consequential in different days, but in different ways. But what I think we see is a pattern of the administration rolling out these executive orders without sort of vetting them through the agencies, without using the teams of lawyers at, for example, the Department of Homeland Security, who have been dealing with this issue for over a decade, without consulting with Congress, without consulting with allied countries who may be impacted by this. So this approach, if you step away from all of the controversial points that are actually in the executive order, the sort of bullying aspect of just releasing a bunch of executive orders and then dealing with the fallout afterwards, that's what's really going to be tested here. And this will be the first test. And the pushback will come from lawmakers. It will come from the human rights community. It will come from lawyers representing these affected people, and it will come from countries all over the world who see this as a sort of arbitrary assault on bilateral relations. And the other point here is that, you know, George W. Bush made a very strong effort to impart on us that we need the Muslim world in order to fight terrorism, and that mantra, that sort of idea, is really what's under assault here.
And so, Paige, Donald Trump campaigned on the fact that it was his point of view that President Obama overstepped his bounds by using executive orders, you know, aggressively, too frequently, etc. And he started his first week as doing just that. So what kind of potential legal or constitutional battle might he be setting up with Congress, who will say, we are supposed to be more involved in here, there are provisions that say we should?
Right. I think what he's doing is basically turning the argument on the table. I mean, the Republicans criticized President Obama for using executive orders because they said what you're doing is violating the separation of powers. Our Constitution gives Congress the right to write the laws, the President the right to enforce those laws, and then the courts interpret those laws.
So this is violating the law of the separation of powers.
Exactly. That's the argument, at least. But a president does have a right to issue an executive order, but that order has to be limited to what the president has discretion to do. Let's take immigration, this recent refugee order. The president certainly has the right to determine how the immigration laws are going to be enforced. It's the Department of State's job to review these visa applications, to vet people who are trying to come into the country, and they have a lot of discretion to do it. But if the president issues an executive order and said, I'm not going to vet anyone, I'm simply going to exclude everyone from this particular class or this particular country, then he's really not following the law that Congress wrote, and he's writing something else.
And we're not talking overall as it pertains to all 14 executive orders thus far. We're talking specifically about this one signed that involves a banning of people from these 7 mostly Muslim nations.
Right, and even aside from the fact of whether the order is constitutional, the detention of these individuals raises another constitutional concern. You can't just hold somebody in lockup because the president says so. There has to be a legal basis for it, and that's what this lawsuit is challenging.
And so the attorney that we just spoke with, who said he filed an executive motion, is this tantamount to suing the federal government?
Yes, that's exactly what he did. He filed both a petition for a writ of habeas corpus, in other words, saying release these folks, and then secondly, he wants to certify all the folks who are trying to come in from these countries as a class and then challenge that in court, the executive order itself.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. We'll talk more about this. All right, straight ahead, one of Silicon Valley's biggest names is now weighing in, saying ban, or let's call it the executive order as it pertains to the banning of Muslims from 7 nations. Well, they're saying this is bad for business. We'll discuss.